I stood in my penthouse office overlooking the Chicago skyline, holding a Forbes magazine with my face on the cover, when my phone buzzed with a message from my sister that made my blood run cold. After everything she had done to sabotage my business, after the lawsuits and the betrayals and the calculated attempts to destroy what I had built from nothing, she had the audacity to congratulate me while reminding me that none of it would have been possible without her early guidance. What she did not know was that I had documentation of every single way she had tried to ensure my failure, and I was about to show her exactly what happens when you underestimate someone who refuses to accept your limitations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my modest apartment in Lincoln Park, casting geometric patterns across the hardwood floors. I had refinished myself 3 years earlier. I stood at my kitchen counter, carefully measuring espresso grounds into the French press that had been a graduation gift from my grandmother, the only family member who had ever believed I could build something meaningful with my life. The ritual of making coffee had become sacred to me, a quiet moment of intention before the chaos of entrepreneurship consumed my day. My name is Alexandra Monroe, though everyone in my professional life calls me Alex, and at 32 years old I had spent the past 4 years building a luxury concierge service called Elysian Affairs from the ground up. The company specialized in providing high-net-worth clients with access to experiences and services that most people could not obtain regardless of money. Private island dinners prepared by Michelin-starred chefs, exclusive Fashion Week access, bespoke jewelry commissions from artists who typically worked only with royalty, last-minute reservations at restaurants with year-long waiting lists, and curated travel experiences that went far beyond what any conventional luxury travel agency could provide. I had started the business with $17,000 in savings, a network of contacts I had carefully cultivated during my years working in high-end hotel management, and an unwavering belief that wealthy clients would pay premium prices for truly exceptional service delivered with absolute discretion and impeccable taste. The first year had been terrifying, operating entirely alone from my apartment with a basic website and a single corporate cell phone that I answered at all hours. I had survived on ramen noodles and ambition, spending every waking moment either serving my handful of early clients or networking relentlessly to build the relationships that would become the foundation of my business model. The second year had been transformative. I had landed 3 anchor clients whose combined annual retainer fees allowed me to hire my first employee, a detail-oriented recent graduate named Marcus who handled logistics and scheduling, while I focused on relationship development and high-touch service delivery. We had operated out of my apartment still, but I had converted the second bedroom into a proper office space with professional phone systems and adequate storage for the gift inventory I maintained for client appreciation and last-minute needs. By the third year, Elysian Affairs had 15 regular retainer clients, dozens of project-based engagements, and enough consistent revenue that I had been able to lease a small but elegant office space in River North. I had hired 2 additional staff members and had begun developing proprietary software to manage our complex scheduling, vendor relationships, and client preference databases. The business had genuine momentum, and I had started allowing myself to believe that I might actually build something sustainable and significant. Now, in the 4th year of operation, we were managing 42 retainer clients with a waiting list of prospective members, employing a team of 8 full-time staff plus a network of trusted contractors and specialists, and generating annual revenue that exceeded $2 million. More importantly, we had developed a reputation in Chicago's luxury market as the absolute best option for people who valued their time and expected perfection. My clients included tech entrepreneurs, private equity executives, medical specialists, entertainment industry professionals, and several families with generational wealth who appreciated that I understood the difference between expensive and actually valuable. I had achieved this through obsessive attention to every detail, through building genuine relationships rather than transactional arrangements, through saying no to opportunities that did not align with our standards, and through working hours that would have broken most people. There were weeks when I slept 4 hours per night, when I personally handled emergencies at 2 in the morning because a client's private flight had been delayed, and their entire weekend itinerary needed to be rebuilt in real time. When I negotiated with vendors and partners who initially dismissed me as too young or too inexperienced until my persistence and competence won them over. The work was exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. Every successful event or seamlessly executed service felt like validation. Every client who renewed their annual retainer or referred a friend felt like proof that I had been right to believe in my own vision. I loved the challenge of solving problems that seemed impossible, of finding ways to deliver experiences that exceeded even the highest expectations, of building something that mattered and that bore my personal stamp of excellence. My apartment reflected the tension between my professional success and my personal austerity. The space was beautiful in a minimalist way, with carefully chosen furniture and art that created an impression of refined taste without extravagance. I had invested significantly in my wardrobe because appearance mattered in the luxury services industry, maintaining a collection of tailored pieces from designers my clients wore, ensuring that I could move comfortably in their world without looking like I was trying too hard or dressed inappropriately for any situation. But I drove a 7-year-old Audi that I maintained meticulously rather than replacing. I cooked most of my meals at home. I had not taken a proper vacation in 3 years, and I lived well below my means because I was reinvesting almost everything back into the business. Every dollar that was not required for operations or for maintaining the professional image that my work demanded went into a business development fund that I was building toward a significant expansion I had been planning for 18 months. My vision was to transform Elysian Affairs from a boutique Chicago-based service into a national luxury lifestyle management company with offices in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami. I wanted to build proprietary technology that would allow seamless service delivery across markets, to develop exclusive partnerships with luxury brands and service providers that would give our clients access that literally no one else could provide, and to create a business that could eventually operate somewhat independently of my personal involvement, allowing me to focus on strategic growth rather than daily execution. I had been developing detailed business plans, financial projections, and partnership proposals for months. I had identified potential office locations, researched market conditions in each target city, and had begun preliminary conversations with several venture capital firms that specialized in luxury and lifestyle businesses. The expansion would require significant capital, somewhere between $3 and $5 million depending on how aggressively we scaled and how quickly we wanted to establish presence in multiple markets simultaneously. This was the context of my life on the morning that everything began to change. I finished my coffee, reviewed my schedule for the day on my phone, and prepared to head to the office. I had 3 client meetings scheduled, a site visit for an upcoming event, and a late afternoon call with a potential investor who had been referred by one of my anchor clients. It was a typical day in the life I had built through determination and relentless effort. My phone rang as I was gathering my bag and keys. The screen showed my older sister's name, Victoria Monroe Ashford. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that always accompanied communication with Victoria, a physical manifestation of decades of complicated family dynamics that I had never successfully resolved. Victoria was 37 years old, married to a successful commercial real estate developer named Preston Ashford, and lived in a sprawling house in Winnetka with their 2 children. She had always been the golden child in our family, the one who had made conventional choices that our parents understood and approved of. She had attended a prestigious university where she had met Preston, had worked briefly in nonprofit development before becoming a full-time mother and social organizer, and had built a life that looked picture-perfect from the outside. Our relationship had always been strained by unspoken competition and fundamentally different values. Victoria measured success by social status, by membership in the right organizations, by the perceived prestige of her husband's career and the quality of her children's private school. She had never understood my choice to start a business rather than pursuing a traditional career path, and she had made her skepticism clear from the beginning. When I had first told the family about my plans to launch Elysian Affairs 4 years earlier, Victoria had been the most vocal in her concern. She had questioned whether I understood how difficult entrepreneurship was, whether I had adequately considered the risks, whether I was prepared for the likely possibility of failure. She had suggested that perhaps I should continue working in hotel management for a few more years to build more savings and experience before attempting something so ambitious. Her concern had felt patronizing rather than supportive, and it had stung particularly because our parents had echoed her sentiments. They had expressed worry about my financial security, about giving up a stable salary and benefits, about the possibility that I might damage my professional reputation if the business failed. The underlying message had been clear. They did not believe I could succeed. and they thought I was making a mistake by trying. Only my grandmother, my mother's mother Eleanor, had responded with unconditional encouragement. She had been an entrepreneur herself in the 1960s, running a successful catering business at a time when women business owners were rare and often dismissed. She had understood the fire that drove me, the need to build something of my own, rather than spending my life advancing someone else's vision. She had given me the French press and a handwritten note that I kept framed on my office desk. The only permission you need is your own. Build something beautiful. Eleanor had passed away 2 years ago, just as Elysian Affairs was beginning to gain real traction. She had lived long enough to see that I was going to make it, that her faith in me had been justified. Her death had been devastating, removing the one family member who had truly understood me, and creating a loneliness that I still carried. In the 2 years since Eleanor's death, my relationship with Victoria had become increasingly strained. She made comments during family gatherings about how busy I always was, how I never seemed to have time for family, how my work consumed my life in ways that seemed unhealthy. She would ask pointed questions about my revenue or client roster that felt more like interrogation than genuine interest. She would offer unsolicited advice about business strategy or operations, advice that revealed she understood nothing about what I actually did, or how the luxury services market functioned. Most frustratingly, Victoria would periodically make comments that subtly undermined my achievements. When I had shared that we had reached 1 million in annual revenue, she had said it was impressive while immediately following up with a question about whether that was profit or just revenue. And when I had explained the difference and the healthy margins we maintained, she had said that Preston's company did that much in a single transaction. When I had mentioned hiring new staff, she had cautioned me about the challenges of managing employees, and suggested I might be growing too quickly. The pattern was consistent. Acknowledgement followed immediately by diminishment, praise paired with concern, recognition coupled with comparison to something larger or more impressive. It had reached the point where I avoided sharing professional updates with the family because I knew Victoria would find some way to frame my success as either less significant than it appeared or concerning for reasons I should consider. Despite this history, I answered her call because I had been raised to respect family bonds, and because some part of me still hoped that Victoria might eventually become genuinely supportive rather than performatively concerned. "Alex, good morning." Victoria's voice came through bright and cheerful. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "I'm heading to the office," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What's going on?" "I wanted to talk to you about something exciting," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Preston and I have been discussing your business, and we think we might be able to help you take it to the next level." I felt immediately wary. Victoria and Preston had never expressed interest in being involved with Elysian Affairs beyond asking intrusive questions at family dinners. The sudden enthusiasm felt suspicious rather than encouraging. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. "Well, Preston has been incredibly successful in commercial real estate, as you know, and he has extensive experience with business development and expansion. We've been thinking that Elysian Affairs has real potential, but that you might benefit from more sophisticated guidance as you try to scale. Preston would be willing to come on as a strategic advisor or even an investor if the terms made sense." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I stopped walking, standing still on the sidewalk outside my apartment building as I processed what Victoria was suggesting. The offer was presented as generous assistance, but I heard the underlying message clearly. My business had potential, but I lacked the sophistication to fully realize it without help from someone like Preston who understood real business. "That's an interesting idea," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "But I'm not actually looking for an advisor at this stage. I have a clear strategic plan for expansion, and I'm in conversations with several specialized investors who understand the luxury lifestyle management space specifically." "Oh, Alex." Victoria's tone shifted to something that sounded like pity. "I know you're proud of what you've built. You should be. But there's a difference between running a small local service and building a real company. Preston knows how to structure deals, how to negotiate with investors, how to protect yourself from getting taken advantage of by people who might not have your best interests at heart. He's offering to help you because we're family." The condescension in her voice was barely veiled. My small local service had generated more than $2 million in revenue last year. My clients included some of the wealthiest and most discerning people in Chicago. I had built every aspect of the business myself, learning constantly and adapting to challenges without anyone's help. I appreciate the thought, I said, forcing politeness into my voice. But I'm comfortable with the direction we're heading. If I decide I need advisory support, I'll definitely consider all options. Don't be stubborn about this, Alex, Victoria said, and now the concern sounded more like warning. You've done well getting to this point, but scaling a business is completely different from starting one. You're going to need real expertise and significant capital. Preston can provide both, and he's willing to do it at family rates rather than what he would normally charge or require for equity. You're not going to get a better offer than this. I felt anger rising in my chest, the familiar frustration of being treated like a naive child who did not understand my own business or my own capabilities. Victoria had no idea what Elysian Affairs actually was, no understanding of the relationships I had built or the reputation we had established, no concept of the careful strategic planning I had done for the expansion I was preparing to execute. Victoria, I need to get to the office, I said, cutting the conversation short before I said something I might regret. Thank you for thinking of me. I'll talk to you later. Just don't make a mistake because of pride, Victoria said quickly before I could hang up. I'm trying to help you. Don't let this opportunity pass because you're too proud to accept guidance from family who actually know what they're doing. I ended the call without responding and stood on the sidewalk taking deep breaths, trying to calm the anger and hurt that surged through me. The implication could not have been clearer. Victoria and Preston believed I was in over my head, that I needed their rescue, that I would fail without their sophisticated intervention. The assumption that I did not know what I was doing, that my 4 years of success had been luck rather than skill, that I needed saving from my own incompetence made me want to scream. But beneath the anger was something else. A cold, focused determination. I would prove exactly how wrong they were. I would build Elysian Affairs into something so successful, so undeniably impressive, that no one could ever again suggest I needed their help or guidance. I continued walking to the office, my mind racing through the implications of Victoria's call. This was not simply an awkward family conversation. This was Victoria positioning herself and Preston as the sophisticated experts who could save me from my own limitations, setting up a narrative where any future success I achieved could be attributed to their wisdom in offering to help even if I had foolishly declined their assistance. I thought about the expansion plans I had been developing so carefully, the investor conversations I had been having with people who actually understood luxury services and lifestyle management, the partnerships I had been negotiating with brands and providers who recognized the value of what we had built. I thought about the team I had assembled, talented and dedicated people who had chosen to work for Elysian Affairs because they believed in the vision and culture we had created. Victoria and Preston understood none of this. They saw a small business that needed professional management, a woman who had gotten lucky but would inevitably hit a ceiling without male expertise and capital, an opportunity to position themselves as benefactors while actually taking control. By the time I reached the office, I had made a decision. I would accelerate my expansion timeline. I would close on investment capital within the next 60 days. I would open our New York office by the end of the year. I would build Elysian Affairs into something so substantial and successful that no one could ever again offer to save me from my own ambition. I walked into our office suite, a beautifully designed space with exposed brick, modern furniture, and walls displaying photographs from events we had produced and experiences we had curated for clients. My team was already working, voices floating from different areas as they handled client calls and coordinated logistics for upcoming services. Marcus looked up from his desk and caught my expression. He had worked with me long enough to read my moods accurately, and he stood immediately, walking over with concern on his face. "What happened?" he asked quietly. "My sister thinks I need her husband to save my business," I said, keeping my voice low so the rest of the team would not hear. "She thinks we're a cute little local operation that needs real business expertise to become legitimate." Marcus's expression shifted to anger on my behalf. He knew the history, knew how hard I had worked, and how much I had sacrificed to build what we had created together. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I looked around the office at everything we had built, at the team working diligently to deliver exceptional service to clients who trusted us with their most important moments and experiences, at the evidence of 4 years of relentless effort and unwavering standards. I'm going to show her exactly what real business expertise looks like, I said. We're accelerating the expansion. I want to schedule meetings with all 3 of our top investor prospects this week. I want updated financial projections showing aggressive but realistic growth trajectories. I want our New York market analysis finalized. We're going to move fast and we're going to do this right. And when we're done, no one will ever again suggest that I need saving. Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that acknowledged a challenge accepted and a gauntlet thrown down. Let's do it, he said simply. I walked to my office and closed the door. Sitting at my desk and opening my laptop, I pulled up the detailed expansion plan I had been refining for months and began reviewing it with fresh urgency. Everything was there. Market analysis, competitive positioning, financial projections, operational requirements, partnership strategies, technology development roadmaps, and hiring plans. I had done the work. I had built the foundation. I had created something valuable and sustainable. Now I was going to prove it to everyone who had ever doubted me. Everyone who had ever suggested I needed their help to succeed. Everyone who had ever underestimated what I was capable of achieving. The phone call from Victoria had been meant to position her and Preston as generous family members offering assistance to someone in need. Instead, it had ignited something fierce and focused inside me. I would build an empire, and I would do it without their help or their approval. When I succeeded, and I would succeed, there would be no question about who had made it happen or what I was capable of achieving on my own terms. I pulled up my investor contact list and began composing emails requesting meetings. The expansion of Elysian Affairs into a national luxury lifestyle management company was no longer a careful future plan. It was happening now, driven by determination and fueled by the fire of proving wrong everyone who had ever doubted me. The morning sunlight continued streaming through the office windows, and I worked with focused intensity, knowing that I had just committed to the most challenging and important phase of my professional life. Victoria had meant to offer help. Instead, she had provided the final push I needed to stop being cautious and start being audacious. I would show her exactly what I was capable of building, and it would be magnificent. The next 72 hours unfolded with the intensity of a controlled explosion. I had sent meeting requests to 3 venture capital firms that specialized in luxury and lifestyle investments, and all 3 had responded within 24 hours with available time slots. The speed of their responses told me what I had suspected. Elysian Affairs had been on their radar already, and they had been waiting to see if I was serious about scaling beyond Chicago. The first meeting was scheduled with Meridian Capital Partners, a New York-based firm that had invested in several successful luxury brands and high-end service companies. The second was with Cascade Ventures out of San Francisco, known for their portfolio of technology-enabled premium services. The third was with Vanguard Growth Equity, a Chicago firm that typically invested locally, but had the capital and expertise to support national expansion. Marcus had worked late into the night preparing updated financial materials, market analysis documents, and presentation decks that told the story of Elysian Affairs with both data and narrative. Our financial trajectory was impressive by any standard. We had grown revenue by an average of 137% year over year since founding. We maintained healthy profit margins above 30%. Our client retention rate exceeded 92%. And our waiting list suggested significant unmet demand even in our home market. I spent Tuesday evening rehearsing my pitch, refining the narrative arc that would take investors from understanding what we currently were to envisioning what we could become. The key was demonstrating that Elysian Affairs was not simply a concierge service, but rather a platform for delivering extraordinary experiences to people who valued their time above almost everything else. Our competitive advantage was not just our network or our taste, though both were exceptional. Our advantage was the culture we had built, the standards we maintained, and the genuine relationships we cultivated with both clients and partners. Wednesday morning arrived with the clarity that comes from purpose-driven adrenaline. I dressed in a navy Armani suit that communicated confidence without ostentation, paired with understated jewelry, and the Cartier watch that had been Eleanor's final gift to me before she died. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone who belonged in rooms where decisions about millions of dollars were made, someone who had earned the right to ask for significant capital because she had already proven she could build something valuable. The Meridian Capital meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon via video conference, which meant I had the morning to handle regular business operations and ensure that my team had everything they needed to manage client services, while I focused on investor conversations. I arrived at the office at 7, earlier than usual, and found that Marcus had already been there for an hour, making final adjustments to presentation materials. We spent 90 minutes reviewing every aspect of the pitch, anticipating questions, preparing responses to potential objections, and ensuring that we had supporting documentation for any claim we made. Marcus would join the video calls to handle technical aspects and provide operational details when needed, but these conversations were ultimately mine to lead. Investors were betting on founders as much as businesses, and I needed to demonstrate that I had the vision, the competence, and the determination to execute at the scale we were proposing. The morning client work provided welcome distraction from my nervousness about the afternoon meeting. I took a call with a new client who was planning an elaborate surprise for his wife's 40th birthday and wanted to create an experience that would feel magical without being cliché. We discussed possibilities ranging from a private dinner at the Art Institute surrounded by her favorite paintings to a weekend at a restored estate in Door County, with activities tailored to her specific interests. The conversation reminded me why I loved this work: the creative problem-solving and the joy of making meaningful moments possible for people who trusted us with their most important celebrations. At 1:30 I retreated to my office, closed the door, and prepared for the Meridian Capital call. Marcus joined me with his laptop to manage the technical connection, and at precisely 2 o'clock we initiated the video conference with partners David Chan and Rebecca Martinez. David was in his early 50s with silver hair and the kind of calm confidence that came from decades of successful investing. Rebecca was younger, perhaps 40, with sharp eyes that communicated intense analytical focus. They greeted us warmly and thanked us for taking the time to present, and I launched into the pitch I had refined over the previous days. I began by telling the story of Elysian Affairs, not with statistics but with a specific example of the kind of value we created. I described a client who had come to us 3 years earlier, a tech entrepreneur who had recently sold his company and was struggling to manage the complexity that extreme wealth had introduced into his life. He had been spending hours each week coordinating travel, managing household staff, planning experiences for his family, and handling the thousands of small decisions that consumed time he wanted to spend building his next venture or being present with his children. We had become his strategic partner in life management, handling everything from routine tasks like restaurant reservations to complex projects like coordinating an extended family trip to Africa that involved 12 people across 3 generations with widely varying interests and mobility considerations. Over 3 years, we had given him back approximately 20 hours per week of personal time, while ensuring that every aspect of his life ran smoothly, and that his family had access to extraordinary experiences they would never forget. That client now paid us $80,000 annually in retainer fees and referred us to other entrepreneurs in his network. He described Elysian Affairs as the best investment he had ever made because we delivered something money typically could not buy: time and peace of mind. I explained that this was the model we had replicated across 42 retainer clients, that our service was not about luxury for its own sake, but about delivering meaningful value to people whose time was genuinely precious. Our clients included medical professionals who spent their working hours saving lives and did not want to spend their off hours managing household logistics. They included executives whose decisions affected thousands of employees and who needed their limited personal time to be protected and maximized. They included creative professionals and entrepreneurs who had built significant wealth but lacked the infrastructure to manage the complexity that wealth created. Then I transitioned to the opportunity. Chicago represented our proof of concept, but the market for what we provided existed in every major city with significant concentrations of wealth. New York alone had more than 1 million households with investable assets exceeding $1 million, and Los Angeles and Miami each had hundreds of thousands. The total addressable market for premium lifestyle management services in our target cities exceeded $15 billion annually, and we were capturing an infinitesimal fraction of it because we operated in only one location. Our expansion strategy was methodical and based on clear market analysis. We would enter New York first because it represented the largest market and because we already had clients with dual residences who had asked about extending our services to their New York homes. We would establish a physical office presence with local staff who understood the New York market specifically, while leveraging our Chicago-based systems and partnerships where appropriate. Once New York operations were stable and profitable, we would replicate the model in Los Angeles and Miami sequentially, building a four-city footprint that would position us as the preeminent national provider of luxury lifestyle management. The capital requirements were straightforward. We needed funding for office build-outs and deposits, for hiring and training local teams, for marketing and client acquisition in new markets, and for technology development that would allow seamless service delivery across multiple cities with consistent quality and coordination. Our projections showed that with $3 million in growth capital, we could achieve profitability in each new market within 18 months of launch and reach combined annual revenue of $15 million across all 4 cities within 4 years. David and Rebecca listened intently, occasionally taking notes, and asked questions that demonstrated they had done preliminary research on both our company and the broader luxury services market. David wanted to understand our client acquisition costs and lifetime value metrics. I walked him through the numbers, showing that our average client acquisition cost was approximately $12,000 when accounting for all marketing and networking expenses, and that our average client lifetime value exceeded $140,000 based on retention rates and annual spending patterns. Rebecca focused on competitive differentiation and sustainability. She wanted to know what prevented larger, better capitalized competitors from replicating our model and capturing market share before we could establish national presence. I explained that our competitive advantages were less about proprietary technology or unique partnerships, and more about culture and execution. The luxury services market was filled with companies that made similar promises, but few delivered consistently exceptional experiences with genuine attention to detail and relationship depth. Our team was trained to understand that we were not order takers but rather strategic partners who anticipated needs before clients articulated them, who remembered preferences and applied them proactively, who solved problems before they became emergencies. We maintained vendor relationships based on mutual respect and fair dealing, which meant we could access inventory and opportunities that other concierge services could not because we had built genuine trust over years. These advantages could theoretically be replicated, but doing so required time, consistent investment in people and culture, and a willingness to prioritize long-term relationship building over short-term revenue maximization. Most competitors were unwilling or unable to make those investments, which created sustained differentiation for us. The conversation extended beyond the scheduled hour, which I interpreted as a positive sign. David and Rebecca seemed genuinely engaged with the opportunity and asked increasingly specific questions about operational details, expansion timelines, and potential return scenarios. We discussed governance structures, what kind of board involvement they would expect, and how they typically supported portfolio companies beyond capital provision. As the call concluded, David indicated that Meridian would conduct deeper diligence over the next 2 weeks and would schedule a follow-up conversation to discuss potential term sheet parameters if their analysis confirmed what we had presented. Rebecca added that they would want to speak with some of our clients and vendor partners as part of their diligence process, and I assured them we could facilitate those conversations with appropriate confidentiality protections. When the video call ended, Marcus and I sat in silence for a moment, processing what had just occurred. The meeting had gone as well as I could have hoped. They had been engaged, their questions had been sophisticated but fair, and they had clearly been evaluating the opportunity seriously rather than simply taking an exploratory meeting. The Cascade Ventures meeting the following morning followed a similar pattern, though their questions focused more heavily on technology and scalability. They wanted to understand our systems for managing client preferences, coordinating complex logistics across multiple vendors and time zones, and ensuring consistent service quality as we scaled team size. I walked them through the proprietary software we had developed, demonstrated how it integrated with various booking and communication platforms, and explained our plans for additional development that would enable more sophisticated automation of routine tasks, while preserving high-touch human interaction for complex or sensitive requests. The Vanguard Growth Equity meeting on Friday was different in tone because the partners already knew me by reputation through mutual connections in Chicago's business community. They had heard about Elysian affairs from clients and colleagues, And their questions were less about validating the concept and more about understanding our specific expansion strategy and capital efficiency. They pushed particularly hard on whether we needed to establish physical office presence in each new city, or whether we could operate more leanly with remote teams and flexible workspace arrangements. I explained my conviction that physical offices were essential for several reasons. First, they signaled permanence and commitment to local markets, which mattered when asking high-net-worth clients to trust us with intimate details of their lives and significant spending. Second, they enabled team cohesion and culture development, which were critical for maintaining service quality as we grew. Third, they facilitated relationship building with local vendors, partners, and potential clients who responded better to face-to-face interactions than remote coordination. The offices did not need to be extravagant, but they needed to exist and to reflect our brand positioning. By Friday afternoon, I had completed all 3 initial investor meetings and had follow-up conversations scheduled with each firm for the following week. All 3 had indicated serious interest pending diligence, and all 3 had requested client references, financial documentation, and operational materials that Marcus and I would need to prepare over the weekend. I left the office Friday evening feeling simultaneously exhilarated and exhausted. The investor conversations had gone well, perhaps better than I had dared to hope, and I was beginning to believe that we might actually close on growth capital within my aggressive 60-day timeline. But the intensity of the past week had been draining, and I still had regular business operations to manage alongside the expansion process. I stopped at my favorite wine shop on the way home and picked up a bottle of champagne that costs more than I typically spent on wine. If there was ever a time to celebrate incremental progress, this was it. I had taken the first serious steps toward transforming Elysian Affairs from a successful local business into a national company, and I had done it on my own terms without Victoria's help or Preston's capital. My phone rang as I was unlocking my apartment door, and I saw my mother's name on the screen. I considered not answering, anticipating that Victoria had reported our earlier conversation, and that I was about to receive some version of concern or disappointment. But avoiding family was not my style, so I answered while balancing the champagne bottle and my work bag. My mother, Diane, greeted me with her usual warmth before getting to what was clearly the purpose of her call. Victoria had mentioned that Preston had offered to help with my business expansion, and that I had declined his assistance. She wanted to make sure I was not letting pride prevent me from accepting guidance that could be valuable. I took a deep breath and explained, as calmly as I could manage after the emotional intensity of the week, that I had not declined assistance out of pride but rather because I had already developed comprehensive expansion plans and was in active conversations with investors who specialized in exactly the type of business I was building. I was grateful that Preston had been willing to offer his time, but his expertise was in commercial real estate development, not in luxury services or lifestyle management, and I needed partners who understood my specific market and business model. My mother was quiet for a moment before responding that Victoria had made it sound like I was being stubborn and refusing help that I desperately needed. I explained that Victoria's characterization was not accurate, that Elysian Affairs was financially healthy and operationally strong, and that the expansion I was planning was based on careful analysis and strategic thinking, rather than desperate ambition. The conversation shifted into familiar territory. My mother expressed general concern about whether I was taking care of myself, whether I was working too hard, whether I had any kind of personal life outside of business. I provided reassuring answers while feeling the familiar frustration of being seen as someone who needed protection from her own choices, rather than someone who was competently navigating a challenging but rewarding professional journey. Before we ended the call, my mother said something that crystallized the underlying dynamic. She mentioned that Victoria and Preston were just trying to look out for me, because they had experience and resources that could help me avoid mistakes. The implication was clear. I was viewed as the younger sister who was trying to do something impressive, but who would inevitably need rescue from those with more wisdom and sophistication. After we hung up, I opened the champagne and poured myself a generous glass. I stood at my apartment window looking out at the Chicago skyline and thought about the perception gap between how my family viewed me and what I had actually accomplished. They saw someone playing at entrepreneurship who would eventually hit a wall and need their intervention. I saw 4 years of relentless work, proven business model validation, and a clear path to building something genuinely significant. The weekend was consumed by preparing materials for investor diligence. Marcus and I worked both days organizing financial records, preparing client reference lists with appropriate confidentiality protections, documenting our operational processes, and creating supplementary materials that address questions that had emerged during our initial meetings. We also maintained regular client services, handling several urgent requests and coordinating logistics for events scheduled for the following week. By Sunday evening, I was exhausted but satisfied with what we had accomplished. The diligence packages were comprehensive and professional, ready to be shared with all 3 investor groups on Monday morning. I had also scheduled follow-up calls with each firm for later in the week to discuss their preliminary findings and address any additional questions that emerged from their review of materials. Monday morning arrived with the particular energy that comes from knowing you are in the middle of something significant. I sent the diligence packages to all 3 firms, and then turned my attention to regular business operations. We had 2 new client onboarding meetings scheduled, a site visit for an upcoming private dinner event, and ongoing coordination for several complex travel arrangements that required attention to constantly shifting variables. The week progressed with a rhythm of parallel tracks. I managed regular business during days and conducted investor update calls during evenings, balancing operational excellence with expansion planning. Each investor conversation revealed additional layers of due diligence as the firms validated our claims, spoke with our clients and partners, and evaluated our financial projections against their own models and market analysis. Meridian Capital seemed most focused on our client concentration and retention metrics, wanting to understand the sustainability of our business model and the likelihood that we could replicate our Chicago success in new markets. Cascade Ventures focused heavily on our technology capabilities and development roadmap, pushing us to articulate more aggressive plans for automation and scalability. Vanguard Growth Equity concentrated on local market dynamics and competitive positioning, wanting to understand how we would establish presence and credibility in cities where we had no existing brand recognition. Each firm had legitimate questions that reflected different investment philosophies and risk assessments. I found myself appreciating the rigor of their analysis even when it felt intense or demanding. These were sophisticated investors evaluating a significant capital deployment, and their thoroughness was appropriate and actually reassuring. By the end of the second week of intensive diligence, I had developed a clear sense of which firm would be the best partner for Elysian affairs. Meridian Capital had the deepest expertise in luxury brands and high-end services. They had portfolio companies we could learn from and potentially partner with, and their partners had asked questions that demonstrated genuine understanding of what made our business valuable beyond simple financial metrics. Their proposed terms were fair, valuing the company at a level that reflected what we had built, while providing them with meaningful upside if we executed successfully on the expansion. On a Thursday evening 3 weeks after my initial conversation with Victoria, I received a formal term sheet from Meridian Capital, offering $3 million in growth equity at a pre-money valuation of $9 million. The terms included board representation, standard investor protections, and milestone-based tranches that would release capital as we achieved specific expansion objectives. I reviewed the term sheet with Marcus and with a lawyer who specialized in venture capital transactions, and we all agreed that the terms were strong and that Meridian would be an excellent partner. I sent a message to David Chun accepting the term sheet subject to final documentation and requested that we schedule a kickoff call to begin planning the formal partnership and expansion execution. His response came within an hour, expressing enthusiasm about working together and proposing that we meet in person in New York the following week to begin detailed planning. I sat at my desk after sending my acceptance message and allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. In less than 4 weeks, I had gone from being told I needed my brother-in-law's help to survive business expansion to closing a term sheet with a premier venture capital firm that validated both what I had built and my vision for what we could become. The $9 million valuation meant that my ownership stake in Elysian Affairs, even after dilution from the new investment, was worth more than $6 million on paper. More importantly, I had proven to myself that my instincts were correct, that my strategic thinking was sound, and that I could compete effectively for sophisticated capital without needing rescue or guidance from family members who fundamentally misunderstood what I was building. I called Marcus into my office and told him about the accepted term sheet. His face broke into a huge smile and he actually hugged me, an unusual display of emotion from someone typically reserved and professional. We had worked side by side for years building Elysian Affairs from an ambitious idea into something valuable and sustainable, and this moment represented validation for both of us. That evening I allowed myself to imagine telling Victoria about the investment and the valuation, about proving that her concern had been misplaced and her offer of Preston's assistance unnecessary. But even as I imagined that conversation, I knew it would not bring the satisfaction I anticipated. Victoria would find some way to diminish the achievement or express concern about new risks I was taking. The validation I needed would not come from her acknowledgement but rather from the continued execution and success of what I was building. I went home that night and finally allowed myself to relax for the first time in weeks. The journey ahead would be demanding and challenging, but I had secured the capital and partnership I needed to make it possible. Elysian Affairs was about to become something much larger than a successful Chicago business. We were about to become a national company, and I was about to prove that every person who had ever doubted me had been wrong. The trip to New York was scheduled for the following Tuesday, which gave me 4 days to prepare materials, brief my team on managing operations during my absence, and handle several time-sensitive client matters that required resolution before I could focus entirely on expansion planning. The pace of work had been relentless for weeks, but I felt energized rather than depleted. Purpose and progress created their own form of fuel, and I was running on the momentum of knowing that everything I had worked toward was finally materializing into concrete next steps. Marcus and I spent Monday preparing detailed briefing documents for the Meridian Capital meeting. We needed to present refined timelines for the New York launch, updated financial models that incorporated the new capital structure, preliminary research on office locations and local market conditions, and initial thinking about hiring strategies for building a New York-based team. The meeting would set the foundation for our partnership and establish expectations for how quickly we could move from term sheet acceptance to active market entry. I had also scheduled meetings with 2 potential New York hires who had been referred by contacts in the luxury hospitality industry. One was a former general manager of a boutique hotel in Tribeca, who had extensive connections among the city's wealthy residents and understood the specific rhythms and expectations of New York's luxury market. The other was a young operational specialist who had worked for a high-end travel agency and had experience coordinating complex international arrangements for demanding clients. Both conversations were exploratory, but if they went well, I wanted to be positioned to move quickly on bringing them into the Elysian Affairs family. I packed carefully for the 3-day trip, selecting outfits that would work for both formal investor meetings and casual networking dinners. I confirmed my hotel reservation at a boutique property in the Flatiron district that several of my clients had recommended, reviewed my schedule one final time to ensure everything was coordinated properly, and set my apartment alarm system before calling a car to take me to the airport. The flight to LaGuardia was uneventful, and I spent the 2.5 hours reviewing materials and making notes about questions I wanted to ask David and Rebecca. The partnership with Meridian was about more than just capital. They had portfolio companies in adjacent spaces, they had operational expertise in scaling service businesses, and they had networks that could accelerate our client acquisition in new markets. I wanted to understand how to maximize the value of the partnership beyond the financial investment itself. I landed in New York just before 6 in the evening and took a taxi into Manhattan through traffic that moved with the aggressive efficiency that characterized the city. I had always loved New York for its energy and density, the way that ambition and excellence felt like the baseline expectation rather than exceptional qualities. Chicago was my home and I was proud of what we had built there, but New York represented validation at a different scale. Success in New York meant you could succeed anywhere. I checked into the hotel and was shown to a beautifully appointed room with exposed brick walls and tall windows overlooking Madison Square Park. I unpacked efficiently, hung my clothes to release any travel wrinkles, and then sat at the desk to review my materials one more time before the morning meeting. I ordered room service and ate while working, a habit that had become second nature over years of building the business. My phone buzzed with a text message around 8:30, and I saw that it was from Victoria. The message said that she hoped I was having a good evening, and that she wanted to talk with me about something important when I had a chance. The timing felt suspicious. I had not mentioned the New York trip to anyone in my family, had not shared the news about the Meridian investment, and had intentionally kept my professional development separate from family interactions to avoid the inevitable commentary or concern. I considered responding immediately but decided to wait until after the Meridian meeting the next day. Whatever Victoria wanted to discuss could wait 24 hours, and I did not want to invite family drama into my headspace the night before the most important business meeting of my professional life. I silenced my phone and returned to my preparation work. The morning arrived clear and cold, the kind of November day in New York where the sunlight felt sharp and clarifying. I dressed in a charcoal gray suit with a silk blouse in deep burgundy, paired with simple jewelry and the Cartier watch that had belonged to Eleanor. I looked at myself in the mirror and felt ready, confident in what I had built and excited about what we were about to create together with Meridian's partnership and resources. The Meridian Capital offices were in a modern building in Midtown, and I arrived 15 minutes early as was my practice for important meetings. The reception area was elegantly designed with contemporary art and comfortable seating, projecting quiet confidence and sophisticated taste. I was shown to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city, and David and Rebecca joined me a few minutes later along with 2 other members of their team who would be involved in supporting the Elysian Affairs expansion. The meeting lasted nearly 4 hours and covered every aspect of the launch strategy in detail. We discussed timelines and milestones, establishing target dates for office lease signing, staff hiring, technology deployment, and official market launch. We reviewed financial models and adjusted certain assumptions based on Meridian's experience with similar expansions in other portfolio companies. We talked about brand positioning and marketing strategy, about how to establish credibility quickly in a market where we had no existing presence or reputation. David shared insights from other luxury service companies in their portfolio about what had worked and what had failed during geographic expansion. The most valuable lesson seemed to be that attempting to launch too quickly with insufficient local infrastructure led to service quality problems that damaged brand reputation permanently, while launching too slowly allowed competitors to capture market opportunity and establish defensive positions. The key was finding the right balance between speed and thoroughness, between aggressive growth and sustainable operations. Rebecca walked through their standard portfolio support model, explaining how Meridian provided not just capital, but also strategic guidance, operational resources, and network access to help companies navigate growth challenges. They had relationships with real estate brokers who specialized in commercial office space, with executive recruiters who focused on luxury and hospitality talent, with technology vendors who could accelerate our software development, and with potential corporate clients who might become anchor accounts in new markets. By the time the meeting concluded in early afternoon, I felt both energized by the possibilities and slightly overwhelmed by the complexity of everything we needed to execute. The expansion was going to require orchestrating dozens of parallel work streams simultaneously, while maintaining the quality and client service standards that had made Elysian Affairs successful in Chicago. It would demand more of me and my team than anything we had previously attempted, and there would be inevitable challenges and setbacks along the way. But I left the Meridian offices feeling confident that we had the right partner and the right foundation to succeed. David walked me to the elevator and mentioned that he was excited to be working together, and that he believed Elysian Affairs had the potential to become the definitive national brand in luxury lifestyle management. His confidence in what we were building meant more to me than I could easily articulate. I had several hours before my first prospective hire meeting, so I walked through Midtown to clear my head and process everything we had discussed. The city thrummed with energy around me, and I felt simultaneously small in the midst of millions of people, and powerful in the knowledge that I was about to establish a meaningful presence here. This was where I would prove that Elysian Affairs could succeed beyond the market where we had been born, that the model was truly scalable, and that my vision had been correct all along. My phone buzzed repeatedly as I walked, and I saw multiple missed calls and text messages from Victoria. The messages escalated from casual to concerned to urgent, asking me to call her immediately about something serious. I felt irritation rise in my chest. I was in the middle of the most important business trip of my career, and Victoria was bombarding me with messages about something she deemed urgent without any context or explanation. I found a quiet corner in Bryant Park and called her back, preparing myself for whatever family drama was unfolding. Victoria answered on the first ring, her voice tight with an emotion I could not immediately identify. "Alex, finally. I've been trying to reach you all day." Where are you? I'm in New York for business meetings, I said, keeping my tone neutral. What's going on? There was a pause, and then Victoria said something that made my entire body go cold. Preston and I were at your office this morning. We wanted to surprise you with some ideas we had been developing for your expansion strategy. But when we got there, your assistant Marcus told us you were out of town and refused to give us any information about when you would be back or how to reach you. Alex, we're family. We're trying to help you. Why is your staff treating us like strangers? I stood frozen in the park, my mind racing to process what Victoria had just said. She and Preston had gone to my office unannounced and uninvited. They had tried to access information about my schedule and whereabouts from my staff. They were framing Marcus's appropriate professional boundaries as rudeness rather than recognizing that he had been protecting my privacy and my business operations from unwelcome interference. Victoria, I said slowly, trying to control the anger in my voice, you cannot just show up at my office unannounced and expect my staff to give you information about my business or my schedule. Marcus was being professional and appropriate by not sharing details about where I am or what I'm doing. That's ridiculous, Victoria said, her voice rising. We're your family. Preston has been working on some really valuable strategic analysis for you, and we wanted to present it in person. We brought detailed materials about commercial real estate opportunities in New York and financial projections for your expansion. We were trying to be helpful, and your assistant treated us like we were trying to steal something. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The presumption was staggering. Victoria and Preston had decided, without any invitation or authorization from me, to develop strategic plans for my business expansion. They had then shown up at my office expecting to be welcomed and given access to information and materials. When my employee had appropriately declined to share confidential information with people who had no official role in the company, they had interpreted it as disrespect rather than professionalism. I appreciate that you thought you were being helpful, I said, choosing each word carefully, but I did not ask for Preston's strategic analysis. I have my own expansion plans that are already in motion, and my staff are instructed not to share details about my schedule or business activities with anyone who is not directly involved in operations. That includes family members. This is exactly what I was worried about, Victoria said, and now her voice carried a note of something that sounded like pity mixed with frustration. You're so determined to do everything yourself that you're pushing away people who could actually help you. Preston spent hours on that analysis, Alex. Real strategic thinking from someone who has built multiple successful businesses. And you can't even be bothered to look at it because of your pride. The accusation of pride stung because it mischaracterized my motivation so completely. This was not about pride. This was about maintaining appropriate boundaries, about protecting the business I had built from well-meaning but fundamentally misguided interference, about refusing to let family dynamics undermine professional operations. I need to go, I said, ending the conversation before I said something I would regret. I have another meeting. Thank you for thinking of me, but please do not go to my office again without an invitation. I hung up before Victoria could respond and stood in the park trying to calm the fury and anxiety that surged through me. The violation of showing up at my office unannounced was significant enough, but the entitlement behind it was what truly disturbed me. Victoria and Preston genuinely believed they had the right to insert themselves into my business, to access my space and my team, to demand information and attention regardless of whether I had invited their involvement. I called Marcus immediately, and he answered with obvious relief in his voice when he heard mine. Alex, I'm so glad you called. Your sister and her husband showed up here this morning with a huge presentation and expected me to let them wait in your office until you got back. When I told them you were traveling and I couldn't share your schedule, they got really pushy. The woman kept saying they were family and that I was being obstructive. I finally had to ask them to leave, and they were not happy about it. You did exactly the right thing, I said firmly. You are not to give any information about my schedule, my travel, my clients, or any aspect of business operations to anyone who is not officially part of the company. That includes family members. If they show up again, you politely but firmly tell them that I will reach out to them directly, and if they refuse to leave, you call building security. Marcus was quiet for a moment before responding. Is everything okay? I mean, beyond the awkward family thing. This seems like it's escalating into something more serious." He was right. What had started as an annoying phone call where Victoria offered unwanted assistance had escalated into uninvited appearances at my place of business. The pattern suggested a fundamental misunderstanding about boundaries and roles, or worse, a deliberate campaign to insert themselves into my business operations regardless of my stated wishes. "Everything is fine," I said, not entirely truthfully. "I just need you to maintain those boundaries firmly. I'll handle Victoria and Preston directly, but I need to know that the office and the team are protected from this kind of disruption." We talked for a few more minutes about operational matters, and then I ended the call and tried to refocus my attention on the afternoon meetings ahead. I had 2 prospective hire conversations scheduled, and both were important for building the foundation of our New York operations. I could not afford to bring family drama into those conversations, or let it affect my professional presence and judgment. The meetings with the potential hires went well, better than I had hoped. The former hotel general manager, a woman named Stephanie Chan, was sharp and sophisticated with exactly the kind of network and market knowledge we would need to establish credibility quickly in New York. She understood the luxury services space intimately and asked intelligent questions about our culture, our standards, and our vision for the New York market. By the end of our conversation, I was confident that she could lead our New York operations effectively and represent Elysian affairs with the professionalism and taste that defined our brand. The operational specialist, a young man named James Rivera, was less experienced but demonstrated the kind of meticulous attention to detail and proactive problem-solving that I valued above formal credentials. He had stories about handling complex travel arrangements and last-minute crises that revealed both his competence and his commitment to client satisfaction above personal convenience. I could see him fitting well into our culture and growing into increasing responsibility as our New York operations scaled. I left both meetings feeling positive about our ability to build a strong New York team, and I sent follow-up messages to both candidates indicating my interest in continuing conversations and potentially making formal offers pending final reference checks and terms negotiations. The progress felt good, tangible forward movement toward making the expansion real rather than just strategic planning documents. That evening I had dinner with David Chan at a restaurant in the West Village that was known for being a gathering place for entrepreneurs and investors. The meal was ostensibly social, a chance to celebrate the partnership and discuss the broader vision for Elysian affairs beyond the immediate New York launch, but it also served as an opportunity for David to evaluate me in a less formal setting, and for me to understand more about how he thought about building companies and supporting founders. We talked about my background and the path that had led me to start Elysian Affairs, about the early challenges and the moments when I had been close to giving up but had found reserves of determination I had not known I possessed. David shared his own story of building and eventually selling a company in his 30s, of transitioning into venture capital, and discovering that he loved helping other entrepreneurs navigate the challenges he had faced himself. The conversation was wide-ranging and genuinely enjoyable, and I felt the beginning of what might become a meaningful professional relationship, built on mutual respect, rather than just financial transaction. David seemed to understand that founders needed support that went beyond capital and strategic advice, that the emotional and psychological challenges of building something significant were often more difficult than the operational or financial aspects. As we were finishing dessert, my phone buzzed with another call from Victoria. I declined it without explaining to David, but he noticed my expression and asked if everything was all right. I hesitated, then briefly explained the situation with my sister and brother-in-law, their offers of assistance that I had declined, and the escalating boundary violations including showing up at my office that morning. David listened carefully, and then offered a perspective that I had not fully considered. He suggested that Victoria and Preston's behavior might be motivated, not by genuine desire to help, but by their own insecurities or competitive dynamics. My success with Elysian Affairs potentially threatened their sense of status or achievement, particularly if they had underestimated me, and were now watching me build something more significant than they had anticipated. Their offers of help might be attempts to maintain psychological superiority by positioning themselves as the sophisticated experts who were generously assisting the younger sister, rather than acknowledging that I had succeeded independently. The insight resonated uncomfortably. I had been interpreting Victoria's behavior as misguided concern or overbearing sisterly involvement, But David's framework made me reconsider whether something more complicated and less benign might be at play. If Victoria felt threatened by my success or needed to diminish my achievements to maintain her own sense of identity as the accomplished older sister, then no amount of boundary setting or explanation would resolve the underlying dynamic. I returned to my hotel that evening feeling unsettled by multiple dimensions of the day. The business developments had been uniformly positive. The Meridian partnership was off to a strong start. The prospective hires looked promising, and the expansion felt increasingly real and achievable. But the family situation had introduced a dark undercurrent of tension and potential conflict that threatened to distract me from the work ahead and create complications I had neither time nor energy to address properly. I tried calling Victoria back to have a direct conversation about boundaries and expectations, but she did not answer. I left a voicemail asking her to call me when she had a chance to talk calmly about what had happened at the office and about establishing clearer guidelines for how family and business would interact going forward. I kept the message neutral and non-accusatory, focusing on practical logistics rather than emotional reactions. The next morning I had a final breakfast meeting with Rebecca Martinez to discuss technology strategy and software development priorities for the expansion. She had deep expertise in this area and had worked with several portfolio companies to build operational systems that enabled efficient scaling without sacrificing quality. We talked about which aspects of our current systems needed to be rebuilt or enhanced to support multi-market operations, about integration requirements with booking platforms and vendor management tools, and about how to balance custom development with leveraging existing commercial solutions where appropriate. The conversation was technical and detailed, but Rebecca's insights were valuable and would help us avoid common pitfalls that companies encountered when trying to scale operational infrastructure too quickly or too cheaply. She emphasized that technology should enable human excellence rather than replace it, that automation was valuable for routine tasks, but that luxury service fundamentally depended on human judgment, taste, and relationship skills that no software could replicate. I left the meeting with clear action items and a renewed appreciation for the complexity of what we were attempting to build. The expansion was not just about opening offices and hiring staff. It was about creating systems and processes that could deliver consistent excellence across multiple locations, while preserving the culture and standards that made Elysian Affairs special in the first place. My flight back to Chicago was scheduled for mid-afternoon, and I spent the morning working from a coffee shop near my hotel, handling emails and client matters that had accumulated during my focus time on expansion planning. I felt satisfied with what the trip had accomplished and excited about the momentum we had generated. But the unresolved tension with Victoria cast a shadow over my otherwise positive feelings. As I boarded the plane, I noticed a missed call and voicemail from my mother. I waited until I was settled in my seat before listening to the message, and what I heard made my stomach clench with anxiety. My mother's voice sounded strained and disappointed as she explained that Victoria had called her in tears the previous evening, upset that I was shutting the family out of my business and refusing help from people who only wanted to support me. Victoria had apparently described showing up at my office as an attempt to bring me strategic analysis that Preston had generously prepared, and she had characterized Marcus's professional boundaries as hostility and disrespect toward family. My mother's message went on to say that she was worried about me, that building a business was clearly consuming my life in unhealthy ways, and that maybe I should consider whether Victoria and Preston's offer of involvement might actually be good for me both professionally and personally. The implication was clear. My family had decided that I was making mistakes, that I needed intervention, and that my resistance to their help was evidence of poor judgment rather than appropriate boundary setting. I sat on the plane as it taxied to the runway, staring out the window at the New York skyline receding in the distance, and felt the weight of what was unfolding. What should have been a moment of pure professional triumph, securing major investment, launching national expansion, building something genuinely significant, was being complicated and undermined by family dynamics I had no idea how to resolve. Victoria had successfully positioned herself as the concerned sister trying to help, and me as the stubborn, prideful person who was pushing away people who cared about me. The plane lifted off and I closed my eyes, trying to process the competing emotions of satisfaction about the business progress and frustration about the family conflict. I had worked for years to build Elysian Affairs into something valuable and sustainable. I had sacrificed personal relationships, leisure time, and financial security to pursue a vision that most people had doubted. I had proven the doubters wrong through performance and results, and now I stood on the edge of transforming a successful local business into a national company with the backing of sophisticated investors who believed in what I was building. But none of that seemed to matter to Victoria or to my parents. They saw someone who needed rescue rather than someone who was succeeding. They interpreted my independence as stubbornness and my boundaries as rejection. And I had no idea how to make them understand that their help, however well-intentioned it might appear on the surface, was actually interference that threatened to undermine everything I had worked to create. The flight attendant came by offering drinks, and I ordered a gin and tonic even though it was only mid-afternoon. I needed something to quiet the anxious thoughts spiraling through my mind, to create space between the emotional turmoil and the strategic thinking I needed to maintain. The next few months would be the most demanding of my professional life, requiring focus and energy and consistently excellent judgment. I could not afford to be distracted or destabilized by family drama, but I also could not simply ignore the situation and hope it would resolve itself. As the plane crossed from New York airspace into Pennsylvania, I made a decision. I would address the family situation directly and firmly, establishing clear boundaries that could not be misinterpreted or negotiated. I would explain once, clearly and completely, what I was building and why their interference was harmful rather than helpful. And then I would turn my full attention to the expansion and the work ahead, refusing to let family dynamics consume energy that needed to be directed toward building Elysian affairs into everything I knew it could become. I had come too far and sacrificed too much to let anyone, even family, derail what I was creating. Victoria's doubts and Preston's condescension and my parents' misguided concern would not define my path or limit my potential. I would prove them wrong not through argument but through results, by building something so successful and significant that no one could question whether I had known what I was doing all along. The plane descended through clouds toward Chicago, and I looked out at the city where I had built my business and my life. This was home, my foundation, the place where I had transformed an idea into reality. And from this foundation I was about to build something much larger. Nothing and no one would stop me from achieving what I had set out to create. Not family pressure, not self-doubt, not the inevitable challenges of aggressive expansion. I would succeed because failure was simply not an option I was willing to consider. I landed at O'Hare just after 5 in the evening and took a taxi directly to the office rather than going home first. Marcus had sent several messages throughout the day indicating that we needed to discuss something urgent related to Victoria and Preston's visit, and I wanted to address whatever complications had emerged before they had time to meditate into larger problems. The traffic moved slowly through the early evening congestion, giving me time to mentally transition from the strategic thinking that had dominated my New York meetings back to the operational reality of managing both a growing business and an escalating family conflict. The office was quieter than usual when I arrived, with most of the team having left for the day. Marcus was still at his desk, and his expression when he saw me walk in confirmed that the situation was more serious than I had initially understood. He stood immediately and gestured toward my office, waiting until we were behind closed doors before speaking. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday," he began, his voice low and tense. "Your sister and her husband didn't just show up asking questions. They brought a full presentation deck and tried to insist that I schedule time for them to meet with the entire team. When I explained that you were traveling and that I couldn't arrange meetings without your authorization, they became really aggressive about it." I felt my jaw tighten as Marcus continued. He explained that Victoria had initially been friendly and casual, suggesting that she and Preston were there to surprise me with some helpful strategic thinking. But when Marcus had politely declined to provide information about my schedule or whereabouts, Preston had become more confrontational. He had suggested that as family members who were trying to help the business, they should have access to operational information and should be treated as informal advisors rather than visitors. Marcus had maintained his professional boundaries, explaining that he had clear instructions about confidentiality and information sharing, and that those instructions applied to everyone without exception. Victoria had then shifted tactics, becoming emotional and suggesting that Marcus was being disloyal to me by preventing family from helping during what she characterized as a critical and potentially risky expansion phase. The manipulation was sophisticated and disturbing. Victoria had attempted to position Marcus as the obstacle between me and valuable family assistance, creating a scenario where his appropriate professional conduct could be reframed as harmful to my interests. If Marcus had been less confident in his judgment or less secure in his understanding of appropriate boundaries, he might have capitulated and provided information or access that would have violated the protocols we had established to protect client confidentiality and operational integrity. "There's more," Marcus said, and his expression became even more serious. After I asked them to leave, I noticed that the presentation materials they had brought included information about our clients. Not names but demographic data and spending patterns that are definitely not public information. I don't know how they got it, but someone either gave them access to internal documents or they found a way to obtain information they shouldn't have. The revelation sent a cold shock through my body. Our client information was protected by strict confidentiality agreements and was stored on secure systems that required authentication to access. If Victoria and Preston had obtained actual data about our client base, it meant either someone on our team had inappropriately shared information, or they had found some vulnerability in our systems or processes that allowed unauthorized access. I asked Marcus to show me exactly what materials Victoria and Preston had left behind. He retrieved a folder from his desk drawer and handed it to me with visible reluctance, as though the documents themselves were contaminated by the violation they represented. I opened the folder and began reviewing what Victoria and Preston had prepared, and with each page my anger intensified alongside a growing sense of comprehension about what was actually happening. The presentation was professionally designed and impressively detailed, covering everything from competitive market analysis to financial projections to operational recommendations for the expansion. But embedded throughout the materials were data points and insights that could only have come from access to our internal business information. There were charts showing client acquisition costs by channel that matched our actual metrics almost exactly. There were projections about retention rates and lifetime value that reflected our real performance data. There were assessments of our vendor relationships and partnership terms that revealed knowledge of confidential commercial arrangements. Someone had provided Victoria and Preston with substantial access to proprietary business information, either intentionally or through careless information security practices. The violation was not just about family members overstepping boundaries. This was potential corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and a fundamental breach of the confidentiality that was essential to everything we had built with our clients and partners. I sat at my desk reviewing the materials with mounting fury, and tried to think through the possible explanations. Our team was small and tight-knit, and I trusted everyone who worked for Elysian Affairs. Marcus had been with me from nearly the beginning and had demonstrated absolute loyalty and discretion countless times. The other staff members had been carefully vetted and had proven themselves reliable and professional. I could not imagine any of them deliberately sharing confidential information with people they knew had no authorized role in the business. That left other possibilities. Perhaps Victoria or Preston had social connections to our clients or vendors who had inadvertently shared information in casual conversation, without realizing it would be compiled and used. Perhaps they had found a way to access our digital systems through some vulnerability I was not aware of. Or perhaps their presentation was based partly on informed speculation and general industry knowledge rather than actual access to our specific data, and the similarities to our real metrics were coincidental rather than evidence of information theft. I needed to understand exactly what had happened and how Victoria and Preston had obtained the information they clearly possessed. But I also needed to contain the immediate damage and ensure that no additional confidential information could be compromised while I investigated the source of the leak. I asked Marcus to schedule an emergency team meeting for first thing the following morning, where we would review information security protocols and reinforce the critical importance of confidentiality without creating panic or suggesting that anyone on the team was under suspicion. I also asked him to contact our technology consultant who managed our digital infrastructure and request an immediate security audit to identify any vulnerabilities in our systems that might have allowed unauthorized access. If there was a technical weakness that had been exploited, we needed to identify and close it immediately before any additional information could be compromised. Marcus agreed to handle both tasks and then asked the question I had been avoiding. Are you going to confront your sister about this? Because if they got this information through some kind of inappropriate channel, that's really serious. It's not just awkward family dynamics anymore. He was right. What had begun as annoying offers of unwanted help had escalated into something that potentially crossed legal and ethical lines. If Victoria and Preston had obtained confidential business information through improper means, they had committed acts that could justify legal action, regardless of family relationships. But confronting them directly about the information would also reveal that I knew what they had done, and might cause them to destroy evidence or construct justifications before I fully understood the scope of what had occurred. I told Marcus that I would handle Victoria and Preston directly, but that I needed to gather more information first before deciding on the appropriate response. I wanted to understand how they had obtained the data, what they intended to do with it, and whether their actions represented misguided enthusiasm that had crossed ethical lines or something more calculated and malicious. After Marcus left for the evening, I sat alone in my office and called our attorney, a woman named Jennifer Walsh who had handled various legal matters for Elysian Affairs since our second year of operation. I explained the situation as clearly as I could, describing Victoria and Preston's offers of assistance, their uninvited appearance at the office, and the presentation materials that contained what appeared to be proprietary business information they should not have possessed. Jennifer listened carefully and asked detailed questions about what specific information the materials contained, how it compared to our actual internal data, and what our information security practices and confidentiality agreements looked like. After I answered her questions, she was quiet for a moment before responding with a gravity that confirmed the seriousness of the situation. She explained that if Victoria and Preston had obtained confidential business information through improper means, several potential legal violations could be at play depending on the specific circumstances. Theft of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty if anyone with authorized access had shared information inappropriately, potential computer fraud if they had accessed digital systems without authorization, and violation of confidentiality agreements if clients or vendors had shared protected information could all be relevant depending on what investigation revealed about how the information had been obtained. Jennifer recommended that we proceed carefully and methodically. She suggested that I should not confront Victoria or Preston directly until we had completed a thorough investigation of how the information leak had occurred. She offered to engage a forensic investigation firm that specialized in information security and corporate intelligence to determine whether our systems had been compromised, and to trace the source of the leaked information if possible. She also cautioned me about the emotional and relational complications of pursuing legal action against family members. Even if the law was clearly on my side, the decision to involve attorneys and potentially law enforcement in a family dispute would have consequences that extended far beyond the immediate legal issues. My relationship with Victoria would likely be permanently destroyed, my parents would almost certainly take sides, and other family members might feel forced to choose between us. I needed to be certain that the violation was serious enough to justify those costs before initiating formal legal processes. I thanked Jennifer for her guidance and asked her to proceed with engaging the forensic investigation firm. I needed to know the truth about what had happened before I could make informed decisions about how to respond. The not knowing felt intolerable. The possibility that someone on my team had betrayed my trust, or that Victoria had engaged in genuinely unethical conduct to obtain information she had no right to possess. I left the office well after dark and drove home through quiet streets, my mind racing through scenarios and possibilities. The professional triumph of the New York trip and the Meridian partnership felt distant now, overshadowed by the immediate crisis of violated confidentiality and family betrayal. I had worked so hard to build something valuable, and to protect it with appropriate safeguards and professional practices, and now it felt vulnerable in ways I had never anticipated. My apartment felt empty and cold when I arrived, and I poured myself a glass of wine before sitting at my kitchen table to think through how I wanted to handle the direct conversation with Victoria that could no longer be avoided. I could not let days pass without addressing what had happened, but I also needed to be strategic about what I revealed and what I withheld while the investigation was underway. I called Victoria's cell phone, and she answered after several rings with a brightness in her voice that felt jarring given the circumstances. "Alex, I'm so glad you called back. I've been worried about you. Mom said you seemed really stressed and I wanted to make sure you're okay." The casual tone and expression of concern made my anger flare, but I forced myself to remain calm and controlled. I needed information from this conversation, not just emotional catharsis. Victoria, we need to talk about you and Preston coming to my office, I said, keeping my voice level. That was inappropriate, and it created a difficult situation for my staff. Oh, Alex, I'm sorry if we caught you at a bad time, Victoria said, and her tone carried just a hint of condescension. We were just so excited about the strategic analysis Preston had put together for you. He spent weeks researching the New York luxury market and developing recommendations that could really help you avoid some expensive mistakes. We thought you would be grateful to have that kind of sophisticated input. The phrase expensive mistakes landed like a deliberate provocation. Victoria was suggesting that my expansion plans were flawed, and that without Preston's expertise, I was heading toward failure. The presumption was staggering. I didn't ask Preston to research the New York market, I said carefully, and I'm not looking for strategic input from people who don't understand the luxury lifestyle management business. I appreciate that he spent time on it, but I need you both to understand that Elysian Affairs is my company. I make the decisions about strategy and operations, and I don't want or need family members trying to insert themselves into business matters without my invitation. There was a pause, and when Victoria spoke again, her tone had shifted to something harder and more defensive. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're so convinced that you know everything that you can't even consider that other people might have valuable perspectives. Preston has built multiple successful businesses, Alex. He knows things that you don't know. And you're too proud to admit that you might benefit from his experience. I felt my control beginning to slip but forced myself to focus on the information I needed to obtain. Victoria, the presentation materials you brought to my office contain detailed information about my business. Client demographics, financial metrics, operational data. How did you and Preston get that information? Another pause, longer this time, and I could hear the shift in her breathing that suggested she was calculating her response. When she finally spoke, there was a defensiveness in her voice that confirmed my suspicions that the information had not been obtained through entirely appropriate channels. Preston has connections throughout the Chicago business community, Victoria said carefully. People talk about successful companies. He was able to piece together a pretty good understanding of your operations through conversations with various contacts and some educated assumptions based on industry standards. If some of his projections happen to be close to your actual numbers, that just shows how good his analytical skills are. The explanation was technically possible but felt deliberately evasive. Victoria was suggesting that Preston had assembled a detailed picture of Elysian Affairs through industry gossip and inference, but the specificity of some of the data points in their presentation made that explanation feel insufficient. Someone had shared actual proprietary information, either deliberately or inadvertently, and Victoria was trying to obscure that reality with vague references to Preston's analytical capabilities. That doesn't explain how your presentation included information about specific client acquisition channels and vendor partnership terms, I said, pressing harder. Those are not things that could be inferred from general industry knowledge or casual conversation. Someone gave you access to confidential business information, and I need to know who and how. Victoria's tone shifted again, becoming angry and accusatory. Why are you interrogating me like I've done something wrong? Preston and I were trying to help you. We spent time and effort developing materials that could genuinely benefit your business, and instead of being grateful, you're treating us like criminals. This is why people worry about you, Alex. You've become so paranoid and controlling that you can't accept help even when it's offered by family who love you. The attempt to flip the narrative and position me as the unreasonable party was transparent but still effective in creating doubt. Was I overreacting? Was the information in their presentation generic enough that it could have been assembled from public sources and industry knowledge? Or was my instinct correct that a genuine violation had occurred, and that Victoria was now trying to gaslight me into questioning my own assessment of the situation? I need you and Preston to stay away from my office and my business, I said firmly, ending the circular argument. No more uninvited visits, no more presentations, no more offers of strategic assistance. Elysian Affairs is not a family project. It's a professional company with appropriate boundaries and protocols, and I need you to respect those boundaries going forward. Fine, Victoria said, and her voice was cold now. We'll stay out of your business. But don't come crying to us when your expansion fails because you were too stubborn to accept guidance from people who actually know what they're doing. Preston wanted to help you, and I convinced him to invest his time in this even though he has much bigger things to focus on. But if you're going to be ungrateful and hostile, then you're on your own." She hung up before I could respond, and I sat holding my phone in the quiet apartment, feeling shaken by the conversation and uncertain whether I had handled it correctly. Victoria had not admitted to obtaining information through improper channels, but she had not denied it either. She had deflected and attacked and attempted to reframe the entire situation as my failure to appreciate generous assistance, rather than acknowledging that she and Preston had crossed significant boundaries. I spent the rest of the evening drafting a detailed memo documenting everything that had occurred, from Victoria's initial phone call offering Preston's involvement through the uninvited office visit, and the presentation materials containing proprietary information. Jennifer had recommended that I create a contemporaneous written record of events in case the situation escalated to formal legal proceedings, and writing everything down also helped me process the emotional complexity of what was unfolding. The memo took several hours to complete, and by the time I finished it was after midnight. I sent the document to Jennifer and to myself, creating a timestamp that would establish when I had recorded my understanding of events. Then I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what was happening, the collision of professional success and family betrayal that threatened to consume the satisfaction I should have been feeling about the Meridian partnership and the expansion progress. The following morning arrived too quickly, and I was at the office before 7 to prepare for the emergency team meeting I had asked Marcus to schedule. The entire Elysian Affairs staff gathered in our conference room at 8, and I could see concern and curiosity on their faces as they took their seats. They knew something significant had happened, but they did not yet understand the scope or implications. I explained the situation carefully, describing Victoria and Preston's uninvited visit, and their possession of presentation materials that appeared to contain proprietary business information. I emphasized that I was not accusing anyone on the team of deliberately sharing confidential information, but that we needed to review our security practices and ensure that everyone understood the critical importance of protecting client data and business intelligence. I walked through our confidentiality policies, reminding everyone that information about clients, vendors, financial performance, and operational metrics should never be discussed outside the company without explicit authorization. I explained that even casual conversations with friends or family members about work could inadvertently reveal details that seemed innocuous, but could be assembled into a more complete picture of our business by someone with sophisticated analytical capabilities and potentially harmful intentions. The team took the reminder seriously, and several staff members asked questions about specific scenarios and how to handle situations where people asked about their work at Elysian Affairs. We developed clearer guidelines about what could be shared in general terms and what should remain confidential under all circumstances. The conversation was productive and reinforced the security culture I wanted to maintain as we scaled the business and handled increasingly sensitive client matters. After the team meeting, Marcus and I met privately to discuss the technology security audit that was scheduled for later that day. Our consultant, a systems security specialist named David Park, would be conducting a comprehensive review of our digital infrastructure to identify any vulnerabilities that could have allowed unauthorized access to our data. The audit would take most of the day and would require temporarily disrupting some of our normal technology operations, but it was essential to determine whether the information leak had occurred through technical compromise or through human error and indiscretion. David Park arrived at 10 and immediately began his methodical examination of our systems. He reviewed access logs, examined security configurations, tested authentication protocols, and analyzed network traffic patterns for anomalies that might indicate unauthorized access attempts. Marcus and I continued handling regular business operations while David worked, but my attention was constantly drawn back to wondering what he might discover. By late afternoon, David had completed his initial assessment and asked to meet with Marcus and me privately to discuss his findings. His expression was serious as we gathered in my office, and I braced myself for confirmation that our systems had been compromised. The news was both better and worse than I had feared. David explained that he had found no evidence of external penetration of our systems or unauthorized access through technical vulnerabilities. Our authentication protocols were sound, Our network security was appropriate for a company of our size, and there were no suspicious access patterns that would suggest someone had infiltrated our digital infrastructure to steal information. However, David had discovered something concerning about our information backup and sharing practices. Several staff members had been using cloud storage services to back up working documents as a personal redundancy measure, concerned about losing work if their computers failed. These personal cloud accounts had weaker security than our official systems and were not protected by multi-factor authentication or encryption standards. If someone had gained access to a staff member's personal cloud storage, either through password compromise or social engineering, they could have obtained copies of internal documents without leaving any trace in our official systems. The revelation was disturbing because it revealed a security gap I had not anticipated. My team members had been trying to be responsible by protecting their work, but in doing so they had created vulnerabilities that bypassed all the official security protocols we had implemented. The information in Victoria and Preston's presentation could have been obtained by accessing someone's personal cloud storage, either through technical means or through convincing a staff member to provide access under false pretenses. David recommended that we immediately implement a policy prohibiting the use of personal cloud storage for any business documents, and that we provide official backup solutions that met our security standards. He also suggested that we conduct individual interviews with each team member to understand their backup practices and to determine whether anyone had experienced suspicious requests for access to their personal accounts or devices. After David left, Marcus and I looked at each other with the weary recognition that the investigation was going to be more complex and potentially more invasive than either of us had wanted. We would need to talk with each team member individually about their technology practices, asking questions that might feel accusatory even though we were trying to identify system vulnerabilities rather than personal failures. I spent the evening preparing for those conversations, trying to find language that would communicate the seriousness of the situation without creating defensiveness or fear among people I trusted and valued. The team had done nothing wrong by trying to protect their work, but their well-intentioned actions had created the security gap that potentially allowed Victoria and Preston to access information they should never have seen. The individual conversations took place over the following 2 days, and revealed a pattern that was both reassuring and concerning. No one on the team had deliberately shared confidential information with anyone outside the company. Everyone took our confidentiality obligations seriously and had been careful about not discussing client matters or business details in inappropriate contexts. However, 3 team members acknowledged using personal cloud storage for backup purposes, and one person, a relatively new hire named Sarah who managed event logistics, mentioned that she had received a suspicious email several weeks earlier that appeared to come from our technology support, but had asked her to verify her cloud account credentials. Sarah had thought the email seemed legitimate at the time, and had provided her login information before realizing it might have been a phishing attempt. She had changed her password afterward, but had not reported the incident because she was not sure anything had actually been compromised, and did not want to cause unnecessary concern. She was visibly distressed when she realized that her response to that phishing email might have given someone access to her personal cloud storage where she had been backing up working documents that included client lists, financial reports, and operational materials. The pieces suddenly fell into place with devastating clarity. Victoria and Preston, or someone working on their behalf, had likely sent the phishing email to multiple Elysian Affairs staff members, hoping that at least one person would provide credentials that could be used to access personal cloud storage accounts. Sarah had fallen for the social engineering attempt, providing access to her backup files without realizing she was compromising confidential business information. Victoria and Preston had then used that information to create their presentation, assembling proprietary data into a format that made them appear knowledgeable and sophisticated about my business operations. The violation was more calculated and deliberate than I had wanted to believe. This was not family members who had overstepped boundaries out of misguided concern. This was corporate espionage conducted through social engineering and exploitation of a security vulnerability, targeted specifically at my business by people who knew that gaining access to internal information would give them leverage and credibility they could use to insert themselves into my operations. I reassured Sarah that she had done nothing intentionally wrong, and that the phishing attempt had been sophisticated enough to fool someone without specialized security training. But internally, I felt my remaining hope that Victoria's behavior was merely overbearing rather than malicious finally dissolve completely. My sister had deliberately stolen confidential business information through deceptive means, then used that stolen information to create presentations positioning herself and Preston as expert advisors whose assistance I desperately needed. The betrayal cut deeper than any of the boundary violations that had preceded it. This was not just annoying family interference. This was calculated theft designed to undermine my independence and control over the business I had built. Victoria had apparently decided that if I would not voluntarily accept her involvement, she would force it by demonstrating knowledge that made her seem essential to my success while obscuring that her knowledge came from stolen information rather than legitimate expertise. I met with Jennifer Walsh the following morning to share what we had discovered about the phishing attempt and the compromised cloud storage. She listened carefully and took detailed notes, and when I finished explaining, she confirmed what I had already begun to understand. What Victoria and Preston had done almost certainly constituted violations of both state and federal computer fraud statutes. Obtaining unauthorized access to computer systems through deceptive means, even if the immediate target was a personal cloud storage account rather than corporate servers, fell within the definition of computer fraud. Using stolen information for business purposes compounded the legal violations. Jennifer explained that I now faced a decision about whether to pursue legal action against my own sister and brother-in-law. The evidence was strong enough that criminal prosecution was possible if I chose to report the incident to law enforcement. Civil litigation for damages and injunctive relief was also viable, potentially preventing Victoria and Preston from using or sharing the stolen information, and requiring them to destroy all copies of materials created from it. But either path would permanently destroy any remaining family relationships, and would likely become public, potentially creating publicity that could be damaging to Elysian affairs regardless of who was legally in the right. I asked Jennifer to give me time to think about how I wanted to proceed. The decision felt impossibly heavy, balancing legal rights against family obligations, justice against pragmatism, my anger at the betrayal against my exhaustion, at the thought of protracted legal battles while simultaneously trying to execute a complex business expansion. That evening I sat alone in my apartment and thought about Eleanor, about what she would have advised if she were still alive to counsel me through this impossible situation. She had built her own business in an era when women entrepreneurs faced even more resistance and skepticism than I had encountered. She had taught me that success required both strength and wisdom, knowing when to fight and when to conserve energy for more important battles. I thought about the expansion ahead, about the Meridian partnership and the New York launch and the vision of building Elysian Affairs into a national company that would prove everyone who had doubted me completely wrong. That vision would require all of my focus, energy, and strategic thinking over the coming months. Diverting attention and resources into legal battles with Victoria would delay the expansion, create distractions I could not afford, and potentially damage the business through negative publicity, regardless of the legal merits of my position. But allowing Victoria and Preston to escape consequences for their deliberate theft of confidential information felt like accepting victimhood and teaching them that violations of boundaries would be tolerated, as long as they were wrapped in the language of family concern. If I did nothing, they would continue to believe they had the right to interfere in my business and my life, and they would face no accountability for crossing ethical and legal lines that should have been inviolable. By the time I fell asleep that night, I had not yet reached a final decision about legal action, but I had achieved clarity about one thing. Whatever I decided about Victoria and Preston, I would not allow their betrayal to derail the expansion or diminish my focus on building Elysian Affairs into everything I had envisioned. They had tried to force their way into my success, but instead they had strengthened my resolve to succeed without them and despite them. The best response to their doubt and interference would be building something so successful that their skepticism would be revealed as the failure of imagination that it had always been. The weight of managing simultaneous crises while maintaining operational excellence created a pressure that penetrated every aspect of my existence during the weeks following the discovery of Victoria and Preston's information theft. I found myself operating in a state of heightened alertness that was both exhausting and clarifying, where every decision carried implications that extended far beyond the immediate circumstances. The expansion plans with Meridian Capital required intensive focus and strategic thinking. The ongoing business operations demanded consistent attention to client service and team management, and the unresolved situation with Victoria threatened to consume mental and emotional resources I could not afford to divert from building the company. The morning after my conversation with Jennifer Walsh about potential legal action, I arrived at the office before dawn and sat alone in the quiet space trying to organize my thinking about how to proceed. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, and through the windows I could see the city beginning to wake. Early commuters moving through streets that would soon be crowded with the full chaos of morning rush hour. I made a list of everything that required my attention, attempting to create order from the overwhelming complexity of competing demands. The expansion timeline with Meridian was aggressive but achievable if I could maintain focus. We needed to finalize legal documentation for the investment within the next 2 weeks, identify and secure office space in New York within 30 days, begin recruiting for key positions immediately, and launch preliminary market development activities that would establish brand presence before our official opening. Each of these work streams involved dozens of subtasks and required coordination across multiple parties, and any significant delays would cascade through the entire timeline and potentially jeopardize the momentum we had built. Simultaneously, the Chicago operations required continued excellence in service delivery to our existing clients who expected seamless experiences regardless of what strategic initiatives were consuming my attention behind the scenes. We had several significant events scheduled over the coming weeks, including a 50th anniversary celebration for a client that involved coordinating more than 100 guests at a private estate, a luxury travel experience to Japan for a family that required detailed planning of every element from flights to accommodations to curated cultural experiences, and ongoing concierge services for our full roster of retainer clients who depended on our responsiveness and attention to detail. The team was strong and capable, but they looked to me for leadership and final decision-making on complex matters. I could not simply disappear into expansion planning and expect operations to maintain themselves at the quality level that had made Elysian Affairs successful. My physical presence and active involvement remained essential, particularly as we navigated the security concerns and protocol changes that had emerged from the investigation into how Victoria had obtained confidential information. And beneath all the professional demands was the still unresolved question of what to do about Victoria and Preston's deliberate theft of business information. Jennifer had prepared preliminary legal documents that could initiate either civil litigation or criminal complaints, waiting only for my authorization to proceed. The decision felt impossibly consequential, balancing legitimate claims for justice and accountability against the practical reality that legal action would consume time, energy, and resources while creating family conflict that would extend far beyond just my relationship with Victoria. I spent the early morning hours before the team arrived working through financial projections and timeline scenarios, trying to understand how different decisions about the Victoria situation would impact our ability to execute the expansion successfully. If I pursued legal action, I would need to allocate time for depositions, court appearances, and strategy sessions with attorneys. The emotional toll of confronting family betrayal through formal legal processes would be significant, and would likely affect my focus and decision-making capabilities during a period when the business required my best thinking and judgment. If I chose not to pursue legal action, I would need to find other ways to establish clear boundaries and ensure that Victoria and Preston understood that their behavior had been unacceptable and would not be repeated. But without formal consequences, what would prevent them from continuing to interfere or from escalating their involvement if they believed I was unwilling to take serious action against family members? The lack of accountability might be interpreted as weakness, or as implicit permission to continue their pattern of boundary violations. Marcus arrived at the office around 7 and found me surrounded by spreadsheets and legal documents, working through scenarios and implications. He brought coffee from the shop downstairs and sat across from me with the comfortable silence of someone who had worked alongside me long enough to understand when I needed space to think versus when I needed a sounding board for decision-making. After several minutes, he asked the question that was clearly on his mind. He wanted to know what I was going to do about Victoria, and whether the legal situation would affect our expansion timeline. His concern was practical rather than judgmental. We had built Elysian Affairs together over 4 years, and he had as much invested in the success of the expansion as anyone besides me. If the family conflict was going to create delays or complications, he needed to understand the scope so that we could adjust planning and expectations accordingly. I explained my dilemma as clearly as I could articulate it. Victoria and Preston had committed acts that almost certainly violated computer fraud statutes and potentially other laws related to theft of trade secrets and confidential business information. The evidence was strong, and Jennifer believed we had viable legal claims both criminally and civilly. But pursuing those claims would require significant time and attention during the exact period when we needed to be executing the most complex and demanding business initiative we had ever attempted. The distraction could jeopardize the expansion, and the publicity around family legal disputes could potentially damage our reputation with clients and partners who valued discretion and stability. Marcus listened carefully and then offered a perspective that I had been circling around but had not yet fully articulated. He suggested that the decision about legal action should be based primarily on what would best position Elysian Affairs for long-term success, rather than on what would feel most satisfying in terms of holding Victoria accountable, or what would minimize short-term discomfort. If legal action was necessary to protect the business from ongoing interference or to establish clear precedent about confidentiality and boundaries, then it was worth the cost and distraction. If the same objectives could be achieved through other means that preserved more of my time and energy for building the company, then those alternatives deserved serious consideration. His framework helped clarify my thinking. The question was not primarily about family dynamics or personal feelings of betrayal, though those were real and significant. The question was about what approach would best serve the business I had spent 4 years building and was now preparing to scale nationally. Victoria and Preston had attempted to insert themselves into Elysian Affairs through deceptive and illegal means, but their attempt had failed. They had been caught, their methods had been exposed, and I now had comprehensive documentation of what they had done. I could use that documentation as leverage to establish absolute boundaries without necessarily initiating formal legal proceedings. I could confront them directly with the evidence of their computer fraud and theft of confidential information, make clear that any future interference or disclosure of the stolen information would result in immediate criminal and civil legal action, and extract commitments that they would cease all involvement with or interest in my business operations. This approach would achieve the boundary setting I needed while avoiding the time consumption and publicity of actual litigation, at least initially. If Victoria and Preston violated those boundaries after being explicitly warned, then legal action would be not only justified but necessary. But giving them one clear opportunity to cease their interference and accept consequences short of prosecution might resolve the situation more efficiently than immediately escalating to formal legal processes. The approach felt strategic rather than weak, establishing clear lines while preserving resources and focus for the expansion work ahead. I discussed this framework with Marcus, testing the logic and looking for flaws or risks I might be overlooking. He agreed that it seemed like a reasonable approach that balanced multiple competing objectives, but he also cautioned that Victoria had already demonstrated a pattern of escalation and boundary violation. Simply warning her might not be sufficient to prevent future interference, particularly if she felt entitled to involvement or if Preston's ego was invested in positioning himself as an expert advisor to my business. I would need to be prepared to follow through immediately with legal action if they failed to respect the boundaries I established. By the time the rest of the team began arriving, I had reached a tentative decision about how to proceed. I would schedule a direct meeting with Victoria and Preston, present them with the evidence of what they had done, explain the legal consequences they were facing, and offer them one opportunity to avoid formal legal action by providing written commitments to cease all interference and to destroy all materials derived from the stolen information. If they accepted those terms and honored them, I would focus my energy on the expansion and allow the family conflict to remain private. If they refused or violated the agreement, I would immediately initiate both criminal complaints and civil litigation without further hesitation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.